The Tom Woods Show, episode 1006.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, chances are in your Facebook feed you've got people telling you that you want children to die because you oppose Obamacare. Why, don't you know it saves 36,000 lives per year? Smash all this nonsense with my free ebook, Your Facebook Friends Are Wrong About Healthcare. Pick it up at yourfriendsarewrong.com. Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. So glad to have Dave Smith back on the show. Dave Smith, of course, is a stand-up comedian. You can see him as a commentator on Fox Business and the Fox News Channel. But in particular, I want to talk about the fact that he has the #1 comedy album on iTunes. A full week and a half after its release, it is still in the #1 position on iTunes. So you're going to want to check that out. It's called Libertas, and I've watched it, and it's outstanding. So I want to help give it a further boost. You can't get higher than #1, of course, but let's see how long we can keep it there. Dave will be joining us this year for some comedy aboard the Contra Cruise, which I hope to see many of you on. We're getting right down to the wire on that, but it's not too late to make that last-minute decision over at ContraCruise.com. Dave, welcome back.
Oh, it's great to be back, Tom.
What the heck is the deal being at #1 on iTunes? What's going on here, man?
There's a revolution going on, Tom. Just as Ron Paul told us. It's been stalled.
But, you know, I'm so glad there's somebody out there. I mean, look, I love people who publish books, right? I publish books. I have a lot of authors on the show. But I'm glad that you just charted in something that is not a book. Like, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. I'm glad Eric July and his band Backwards hit the Billboard charts. These things are thrilling to me. We need way, way more of this. We need way more Dave Smith out there. So I want to tell people, first of all, I got your special. The day it came out, I went and ordered it. And, of course, I probably could have asked you for a review copy. You would have given it to me. But I thought, what the heck is that? You know, the guy works. I want to buy it. So I went and bought it, watched it immediately. And I just thought, man, I am so proud of this guy, how good he is at what he's doing. But let's just get right off the bat here, Dave. Let's just tell people, especially because they know a little something about my public persona. They're going to be shocked that it is an R-rated special. You don't necessarily want your 9-year-old watching this special. There are little tiny clips here and there that I can get. Like there's a little bit of that fake sign language translator bit that I can play for my kids. That's really about it.
If you go over the clips, you might find ones that you pre-approve, but pre-approve them yourselves. Don't rely on me. It's a raw, edgy comedy special. But I've been doing comedy 11 years, and I started stand-up before I was a libertarian. It was like a separate thing, and being obsessed with politics and philosophy bleeds into the hour a lot. But it's my debut comedy special. It's a very raw special, but it's me really relentlessly making fun of everything about what I find absurd about our system, Democrats, Republicans, all of it. And don't play it around your kids or around anybody who doesn't like cursing.
Well, but particularly, I would say the first 10 minutes are probably the most shocking. So just get through that first 10 minutes. You may enjoy, but make sure at least you get through that first 10 minutes. But anyway, we want to talk about libertarian stuff and current events and all that. But I also kind of want to talk about comedy itself. Like how you go about putting together a special like this. With something like this, is this material, I mean, presumably for your special that's going to be distributed widely, you're going to go with not brand new material, but tried and tested material. How do you pick stuff like that?
Well, I kind of build it over time. I mean, I love writing topical material. And just kind of talking about what's going on in the news right now. I mean, just for example, I love pulling stuff out of literally right now. There's a monitor on in the other room on Fox News right now, and I see they're talking about North Korea, a strike that they've, this has been the thing in the news the other day that North Korea launched another one of these missiles, and already it's like from our perspective, say right, if you're well versed in your Rothbard and Tom Woods and all this stuff, we have this insight that all of these people don't have, which is just kind of hilarious because we actually pay attention to this stuff, unlike all of these clowns. So what's hilarious to me right away is that Gaddafi disarmed and we overthrew him. And then they sit here going like, why would this guy be launching all of these nukes around? And now I already have a hilarious angle that I can take to stage with that nobody else really has. Because nobody else is really thinking about it that way in the comedy world, at least. So literally just doing that. So I'll do this like every day. I'll do this constantly throughout the year, and then I just kind of build it up, and then I can kind of look back at it and be like, oh, okay, what of that material do I think really makes a point? And the whole first half of my special is just breaking down this last year and the Trump moment, and throughout the entire Trump moment, while everybody else is losing their mind and freaking out, I feel like people like us kind of have this insight about how ridiculous both sides are. And just as a comedian, it's just kind of easy for me to translate that into funny.
And of course, I think because we fully get how bad the system is, we don't get that crazy about any particular occupant of the White House, because we know the system's going to be the system no matter what, and it's rotten no matter what. So this, the fact that, I mean, if anything, we understand the problems with Trump far more clearly than the hysterics, who, if I were to sit them down,
it's amazing,
and say, what are 8 problems you have with Trump? They could barely give me an answer. I could give them 28 problems off the top of my head.
That's right. And to me, this is like the biggest issue. And I think I really get this from you. It's my influence from you. But the biggest issue out of all of these things that I try to focus on is like, what gets you outraged? What gets you outraged? And it's so ridiculous what everybody else gets outraged by. I mean, like, so you, Tom Woods, whose work I've followed very carefully, I'd say what gets you outraged, like the most outraged. Well, what comes to mind to me was that speech you gave when you were talking about Madeleine Albright saying it was acceptable that 500,000 children were starved to death. And I remember you giving that speech and saying, this is an acceptable policy proposal. This is an outrage. Like, that's what gets you outraged. What gets, say, like the LP outraged is somebody not, signing a pledge that they're not a Nazi. That's what gets them going. What gets the left wing outraged is like Meryl Streep said, it was the moment that Donald Trump made fun of a reporter with a strange arm. Like, oh, yes, that's it. That was the outrage of our time. So it's all these people and all of the left, their outrage is like on mean words. The right wing's outrage seems to be on like, I don't know, if you're a cuck, that's the alt-right's outrage, if you like cuck to somebody. Meanwhile, like there's still some of us who are sitting here like, what's really outrage, what the state's really doing is this truly horrific stuff that none of you even seem to care about while you're lecturing about outrage.
Yeah, so we can outdo them in terms of righteous rage.
Yeah, really.
We actually have real things to talk about. Now, just to make sure anybody doesn't get lost in inside baseball, LP is Libertarian Party.
But they're not so heavy on the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know it. Yeah, that's another. I'm trying to lay off. I got an episode on that planned for next week that's going to be a bombshell.
Ooh,
so we'll just leave them wondering what Woods has up his sleeve. But these people won't leave me alone, so I'm just going to keep on hitting. Yeah. I'm just going to keep hitting. I think that's what my parents, I can't remember, did my parents teach me don't use violence, or did they teach me keep on hitting until they stop? I forget which lesson it was. It was one of those. But anyway, the other thing was about Trump and the disabled reporter. It turns out that was a fake story.
Right.
Because when you actually look at it closely, first of all, he made that same arm gesture making fun of a whole bunch of other people, just a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, that was like his go-to make fun of.
Yeah.
It was just like a really bad coincidence for Trump, it turns out, because he makes this weird move, and that does kind of look like the reporter he was making fun of. But even aside from that.
Yeah, even assuming that
even
did
assuming
happen.
He was making fun of him. Yeah. It's like the idea that this was the level. Like, okay, look, and Meryl Streep doesn't even realize how condescending she was being in that speech. She said that he made fun of someone he outranked in terms of privilege, who had no voice of his own. And you're like, okay, first of all, the guy was a journalist. Right. What do you mean he had no voice of his own? What an insulting thing to say to an adult journalist.
Yeah, plus more of a voice than literally 99% of America.
I mean, like, what an outrageous thing to say to somebody. Like, that's so much more insulting than what Trump said. It's like she's put him in this box of... It's so funny how the left does this, right? They put you in this box of victim, and then they don't realize how insulting they're being. But it's like the other thing to me, like the bigger picture is just like, are there any adults here? Like, okay, this guy is a guy who's got a handicap. He's got this arm. I don't know exactly what it is, but his arm is messed up. And it's like, okay, he's an adult. He's a man who made it through life with this. He's a journalist. It's like, do you really think he's just going to fall to pieces because someone said something about his art? Like, has he not come to terms with having a disability? I mean, like, maybe he made it through kindergarten, right? Like, what is this assumption that an adult can't handle mean words?
Well, I want you to riff. I'm going to give you something. I'm going to set you up for a couple minutes here and then let you riff on something, because I haven't watched that much Jordan Peterson, but you know who he is, of course, right?
Yeah, I've watched a ton of them.
Okay, you're right. Well, I just started. I watched a video of him on some Canadian TV show, and they have literally 5 people up against him. They have a gender studies professor. They have a trans so-and-so. They're all against him. And he just sits there stone-faced, giving his answers, not intimidated in any way. And then at the end, I was reminded of something I read in an article about SJWs and how they operate. They really don't want to force you out of your job where they have to fire you. They want you to quit. Mm-hmm. They really, like, they don't want to actually have to put a guy in jail literally, because then he'll become a martyr. They just want to scare you, terrify you, so that you'll censor yourself. That's really what they want.
Right.
So toward the end of this interview, the interviewer says to Peterson, "Are you prepared to suffer the possible consequences of your actions?" I mean, he could go before the Human Rights Commission and maybe go to jail. Mm-hmm. And before Peterson can answer, the gender studies professor practically pleads with him and says, "Are you open to learning?" Like Jordan Peterson, who taught at Harvard, just doesn't know enough, right? So in other words, again, could we possibly stop you from doing this, please? And Peterson says, I kid you not, this is what he says: "I'm not doing it." In other words, I'm not going to use these pronouns. I'm not doing it, and that's it.
I love it.
And if they find me, he says, if they find me, I won't pay. If they send me to jail, I'll go on a hunger strike, but I'm not doing it. Now, here's what I'm setting you up for, and for all, you can take the whole rest of the episode because I'm taking too long to set this up. But what I'm looking at here is, this is why I like Milo. This is why, because that little interview we just saw is a microcosm of our whole society. One person standing up for himself against 5 bullies, all of whom are prepared to put him in jail, absolutely prepared to do that to him. And these are people who have everybody behind them. I mean, we all know every actor has a conventional left-wing view of the world. We all know that, to the point where it's a surprise when they don't. Actors, professors, politicians, everywhere. The religion, the conservative movement, everywhere. Leftism is everywhere, and there's that one guy saying, "I won't do it." Yep, I support that. That you're darn right, I support that. Absolutely, I support that. Even when that person is edgy and says and does things I wouldn't say or do, what they represent matters more than any individual thing they do. And I say hooray for the Jordan Petersons and the Milos of the world, because they're, yes, I'm even going to say it, they're keeping freedom alive. There you go, Dave. Riff on that.
I mean, God, I couldn't agree with you more, Tom. I just couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's like, this is where the fight is. This is where the fight really is. This is where the time that we're living in, and this is what we need people to do. And people like me and you could be fascinated by, like, really getting into the debate between anarchy and minarchy, but that's not the issue of our time. This is. And I think, I was talking about this with a mutual friend of ours, Thaddeus Russell, recently when I was on his show. And the truth is, to me, the way I see it is, like, I think right now, and this is what Milo does, is just someone who's willing to stand up there and not just say politically incorrect things, but, like, unapologetically be a leader and somebody who stands for something that is outside of, as you would say, the 3x5 allowable opinion. Outside that index card, and to stand on that and just be unafraid. And because the whole point, as you talked about with these social justice warriors, the whole point of it, I mean, it's like, it's this social version of like, if you've got a line of Jews in a row going into the camps, you shoot one of them so everybody else falls in line. It's like they terrify everybody else out of speaking their mind. And what we need are more of these people, like, because this is, it's a weird thing where you need the leaders and then everybody else will kind of fall in line. Because you see this with academia right now. Like, how many of these people, how many of these pathetic professors just fall in line? They're not really the hard left-wing guys, but they just fall in line. It's like, oh, well, I don't want to rock the boat. And then, someone like Jordan Peterson exposes that. You're like, how is there only like a couple of those guys? I mean, you've pretty much had them all on your shows, like the few professors out there who are like, there's like, you get like 6 podcasts out of it. How are there not more of these people?
Especially once you have tenure.
Right.
Unless you murder somebody, and even then they might say they were extenuating circumstances, you can't get fired. So it really is a conformity factory. And of course, in large part, it's that people who would be inclined to dissent don't get hired in the first place.
Yeah, and it's like this tyranny of social justice warrior people on college campuses. I mean, I really don't think people who are removed and don't read up on this stuff and are removed from college campuses, like 90+% of the population, realize like exactly how bad it is there. I mean, there are things that they are taking. What's strange, I guess, about the turn that's happened in the left over the last decade or so, because things really have changed. And what's really interesting, what's changed is that the left is now taking opinions that are so antithetical to common sense and saying that you're basically a bad person if you don't have this opinion. I mean, opinions that are like, well over 90% of the general public would just laugh at. Like the idea that if you're a straight man and you don't want to engage in sexual relations with a transgendered man, or with a transgendered woman, rather, so someone who was born a man and transitioned into being a woman, and you wouldn't want, that would now make you a bigot. Like this is like coming out of the left wing now. Yeah. Now, I mean, the idea of selling this to the general population is insane. But all drunk sex is rape. I mean, these are things that like kids are taught, and I don't know. It's just there's a lot of humor there, but it's also like completely terrifying.
Yeah, and so that's okay. I want to write a couple things down, make sure I don't forget them. I do want to get to September 11th, which we just commemorated at the beginning of last week, and which you cover a bit in your special. So I'd make sure we get to that. But as long as we're on this topic, I'm curious to know your thoughts as a comedian, given that, and I hope we didn't cover this in a previous episode, but you of course saw that clip some time ago of Jerry Seinfeld talking about college kids and can't tell jokes because they're all, they all have a bat up there, and you can't, nothing's funny to them. I mean, you can't tell that joke, and we're going to publicly shame you for telling a joke. How do you respond to this as a comedian?
Well, I think the only way to respond to that problem is just to make fun of the person who's being so ridiculous. I mean, it's like, if people are going to act like children, then I'm going to try to make fun of that. And I really think mocking those people is the only way to get out of this. I just find it, it's kind of infuriating in a way, but it's like, why, if you really believe in something and somebody is bringing this utter nonsense to you, why would you treat it in any other way?
Now, let's say something about the September 11th observance. So now it's 16 years on.
Yeah.
And you have a bit in your special, and I don't want to have any spoilers about the special. I don't want to tell any of the jokes, even though I'll say your characterization of the Trump phenomenon with reference to the kid at the front of the room giving the book report, that I'll just say that I thought that brilliantly summed up everybody involved. It summed up Trump. It summed up the never Trumpers, and it summed up the ordinary bystander perfectly.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a great bit. But on the September 11th stuff, you do say in the special that if you were to ask people on September 10th, what do you think the Islamic world thinks of America? I don't know, that we're awesome? I mean, what else would they think? And then September 11th, we're going, hey, why do they hate us? And the answer is, well, we've been bombing the heck out of them for years. Right. And your response, and you're, being the average person saying, what? That doesn't sound like us.
Well,
that's what I want to hear you talk about now.
Well, it's really interesting, and the special did release on September 11th, and to me, September 11th was like the day that kind of like September 11th brought me into the political world, if you will. It brought all of us from my generation. Like, we were like 90s kids. And then this crazy thing happened. And like, you remember like the 90s, Tom, the 90s were like, it was like the end of history. Like, everything was done. Everything had been invented and everything had been, even though it hadn't, this just was the feeling of the 90s. And it was like America ruled supreme. It was really the first time in modern history that like one country had that much, you know, like when the Soviets fell. And it's we had the 90s and we're on top, and it's just like The Simpsons and Seinfeld and everything's great. And then 9/11 was like this, like, whoa, that happens to like my grandpa. That's not something that happens in like, that's history, you know? And it changed. It was fascinating to watch everything kind of change in the country. But yeah, I mean, the stuff I was talking about, which is really interesting to me, and for you particularly, because you were at this a little bit before me. But so for people like you who kind of became disillusioned with the American war machine, for you it was the first Persian Gulf War, right? Like, that was really the one that
and I failed that test because I was gung ho for that war.
But the end of it, right, is kind of what started to turn you around, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because it seemed so disproportionate and awful.
Yeah, it's hard to sometimes, if you're looking at things at all, to actually see what they are and not follow the like, you know, state approved kind of, you know, mythology. And then you, like, I heard you say this in a special, but you're like, are there like Iraqis being incinerated while we're watching a Bob Hope special? Seems a little wrong.
Yeah, that's not normal that we would share, especially when it was a battle over Saddam. You know, the Kuwaitis were basically slant drilling on him, and he didn't want them to do that. Now, therefore, it doesn't mean you launch an invasion, but the point is, this is so removed from anything having to do with us. And the fact that we would cheer that grotesquely at what is obviously a bunch of recruits into the army who are fathers and sons and husbands being killed. What is wrong with you?
You know, and I'm going to just digress for a second, but I think it's also something like, you know, when you don't talk about these things in history, you leave a real opening for the other side, and then some other side that you maybe don't agree with comes out and uses the fact that these facts are completely buried in history and that they're really wrong. Like, look, a lot of people, like I've dealt with on my show about things, what I disagree with the alt-right and then the more extreme versions of the alt-right where you get into like really anti-Semitic like people like that and stuff, and all the like neo-Nazis and groups like that. Okay, it's like, don't get me wrong, I disagree with them. Let me disclaim this. I'll sign whatever waiver you want me to. You know, I disclaim I'm not a part of them. But I'll tell you, when you erase from the record books like the atrocities that were committed to the German people in World War II, you give them a very powerful thing. You give them a very powerful thing where they can point to you and go, hey, you know, no one else is willing to talk about this. But it was horrible what happened to the German people. Like, really horrible. From World War I to the end of World War I to World War II to the end of World War II. A lot of really, really horrible stuff happened to them. And since we want to bury all that, it almost makes their case stronger in a way. Anyway, I just thought I'd...
Well, I remember being at Harvard. This will be controversial, but who the heck cares? It's my show. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
I remember being at Harvard, and Richard Herrnstein, who co-authored The Bell Curve with Charles Murray, was a professor there. And then, almost like as soon as the book came out, Herrnstein, who was the expert, he was the Harvard PhD and professor, he died, leaving Charles Murray to defend the book all on his own. But I remember Herrnstein's argument being, look, we've got a real issue here involving IQ. There's no denying that this is an issue. The question is, where does it come from? But there's no denying it's an issue. Only an idiot would deny this is an issue. Right. But the point is, if we can't have a public discussion of a topic like this, then I'll tell you something, you're not going to like the people who will be discussing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Duh.
That is a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that playing out over and over with all this thing. So it's really, you know, you do, if you're against all those elements that will be discussing it, then what you want to do is allow for an open discussion and allow for at least, because the truth is, like you said, like the open discussion will be much prettier than the discussion that comes up if you suppress it.
Yeah, yeah. Because then the only people who are going to talk about it are people who have nothing to lose, have no reputations to be ruined, have no careers to be destroyed.
Right.
People who, and when you have a lot of people who have nothing to lose, these aren't people I would want to organize my society. A whole bunch of people with absolutely nothing to lose, nothing invested. Yeah. So yeah, I wouldn't want to empower those people.
No, I agree. And then, so, but you know, getting back to the 9/11 stuff, what's interesting for people like like you, and then the people who had kind of, like Rothbard and Ron Paul and people like that who were already in the anti-war camp even before you were. For those guys, they're like sitting there going like, okay, so there's hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq dying and all of these things, and we're propping up a brutal dictator in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia and all of these things, like you're looking at these things and it's just, there is something really funny about, and 9/11, as tragic as it is, a lot of humor comes from tragedy. Like there is something funny about someone not even knowing they're in a fight until such a huge blow is struck. And then the day after 9/11, America is sitting here going like, why does everybody hate us? Well, why do they hate us? And our leaders actually settled on they hate us because we're free.
Yeah, I know. They must be laughing at how much people accepted that.
I was like, I love it. Oh, my God. Pat Buchanan said one time, I thought it was really funny, or he wrote, I think it's in one of his books or something, but he said, to listen to a neocon after 9/11, you would think that like Osama bin Laden like found is in a desert somewhere and found a copy of the Bill of Rights and it just started driving him crazy. Congress shall make no law infringing speech. What?
No quartering of troops in people's homes?
This is madness. Are you telling me halfway around the world there's due process? Like that, it's like, well, no, I mean, that's not, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And then to hear, people like you break it down and then to really hear, to listen, to see that we have it on record with Madeleine Albright saying, yeah, 500,000 kids dying is okay by me. That's an okay price to pay by me. You start to sit there and you go, look, I mean, it's so unpopular to say, and that's why I will always, always admire Ron Paul for the courage he had. But to sit there and say, like, how would you feel on the other end of that? Okay, forget all. By the way, I'm not saying there's no merit to the point that Ben Shapiro and a lot of other people make like that when they contrast Muslim culture to Christian culture. I'm fine with that. Let's have that conversation. And if you think 70% of Muslims, support ISIS or support this or whatever numbers you can come up with, look, there's a reason why the Muslim world lives the way the Muslim world lives and we live the way we live. And it's not 100% because it's the military's fault. However, if you're talking about the problem of terrorism, it's so ridiculous to not, that has like almost nothing to do with their culture being different from our culture. We'd be ready to do the same thing to them. I mean, come on, man, you come over and kill somebody's kids? What are they going to be? What are they ready to? Can you imagine? Just imagine, right? Like in America, if some foreign country came in and overthrew our president and just put in their guy who they wanted. Can you imagine what our militias turn into real quick? Our militias were almost ready to go take out Obama over his birth certificate. Can you imagine if it was just openly like, okay, the Russians came and just put somebody in? Our militias are worse than their terrorists already because we wouldn't even play around for a day with that stuff. So like, I just don't think like, yeah, it's not excusing anything. It's not excusing like terrorists, but so guys like you and Ron Paul and these people are saying way before 9/11, they're like, hey, you can't just keep killing people. They're going to hate you. Ron Paul was predicting there was going to be blowback, which, as Pat Buchanan said, has always been the price of empire. Terrorism has always been the price of empire. And so then you have this 9/11 attack. It's just like what, just like what Ron Paul predicted. And then the response to that is like the worst case, the absolute worst response. And then you go into Iraq and Syria and Libya, and you go into these places, and there was never a terrorist problem in these countries. Now we've got a huge terrorist problem in these countries. So it's like the whole blowback narrative, which I do think has been kind of like Ron Paul made that case, and now it seems like no one wants to listen to that anymore. I think it's stronger than ever. And I try to, that's what I hate about this whole, when people too much on the right now, it's like the politically incorrect and the cool thing to do is just bash Muslim culture, which like, look, whatever. I'm not against bashing any culture, but it's just ISIS and Al-Qaeda, all the groups that we actually have problems with in terms of terrorism are groups that the West funded and armed and are in countries where the West went and destroyed things. Like blowback is still the major problem there.
Isn't it funny, as you were describing this, it suddenly dawned on me, I guess something I've known in an inchoate way, that there's some crisis, we can more or less figure out what led up to it, and the state's response is always to do more of whatever the problem was. So, right. So whether it's terrorism, well, then we'll intervene in more countries. That ought to do it. Or if it's a housing bubble, well, then more activity by the Federal Reserve is what is called for. Or if health insurance becomes too high, well, we'll do things that are basically guaranteed to make health insurance even more expensive. Yeah. They never, ever, ever say, well, you know what? Our whole way of looking at the world is wrong. How about we try something different for a change? Never. They never try anything different.
Yeah, it's like, what do you like? I always like because people on the left at times will say to me, like they'll say, well, you guys are too extreme. The market works better for some things and the government works better for some things. And you're like, okay, what does the market work better for? Can I get Elizabeth Warren on record for what she doesn't want the government to run? Is there anything that's can be free of this? I was just responding to Elizabeth Warren on Twitter, although she didn't respond back to me, but she said something, she said, socializing medicine will improve quality and lower costs. And I said, great. Why not bring that magic to everything? Why not embrace full socialism? Like, what are you doing here? I mean, if you can lower costs and improve quality, what industry doesn't need that?
Right.
So I was like, so why not embrace true socialism? And I said, is it the track record of genocide and starvation that holds you back? But anyway, I hit that into 140 characters.
That's really good. I saw somebody sharing something that said, did you see this thing? Socialism starts with questions like this and ends with questions like this. Did you see this one?
No.
Socialism starts with questions like, why can't we give free health care to everyone? And ends with questions like this. And it's a link to an article called, Can Rabbit Meat Save Venezuela from Starvation? That's the question you wind up with.
Yeah, I mean, I laugh, but of course it's in a tragic way. It's hard. A lot of these countries, like I said before, like tragedy and comedy are not unrelated things. So this goes all the way back to, the beginning of humanity. But there's something, I mean, all those countries like Venezuela and North Korea, and so they're very easy to caricature and start making fun of. But I mean, they're just unbelievably tragic. And I agree with you. It's this thing where, you start off having a conversation about spreading around a little bit of the existing wealth. And I was just reading the other day, someone posted in my Facebook group an article from about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it's The Guardian just lecturing free market people like us that no, Venezuela is not going to be an example of socialism gone bad because things are still pretty good over there.
Yeah.
And I'll say, if there's something you really want to hear, for all the people listening to Tom Woods, for all the red-pilled people in your crowd, man, if you want to hear something that is a real sign that someone is a dangerous person, not just that they have a difference in how they see things than you, but they're a dangerous person. If you hear anyone on the left who brags about Cuba's education, that is a person that is a scary, scary individual. And I'll forgive the healthcare one for this one, which is also just utterly ridiculous. It's like, oh yeah, like they have really good healthcare, meaning like the one hospital that journalists are allowed to come into is really good.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you would say, for anybody who would ever say they have good education, like Bernie Sanders has bragged about their education, and a lot of other left-wing people I know have, the idea that you would think a country that does not allow dissent, where you are not allowed to read the books you choose, you're not allowed to ask the questions you want, the idea that you consider that education, that you could consider that at all, that a country that doesn't have free speech could even approach the idea of education, that is indoctrination. And anybody who confuses education with indoctrination is a very dangerous person.
Let's say a quick thing about Libertas before we wrap up, which we've implicitly been discussing because it runs the gamut in terms of the topics it covers. But what I love about it, in addition to how well done it is and how funny you are and all that, is that even though you have a libertarian audience because of your podcast and your TV appearances, this works for everybody. It really works for everybody. So instead of thinking, well, what book can I make my friend read? And you're thinking, there's only a 10% chance he's going to read that book anyway. How about, here's a comedy special your friend could watch that at least gets them thinking, and yet you do it. You're so funny that people don't even realize you're hitting them over the head. Because you're not really.
Well, I built this material in comedy clubs across the country, and particularly I'm based in New York City, so like I had to build stuff that can get anyone to laugh at this. Like, no matter where you're coming from, I can make you laugh at this. So that's I think that's how it turned out that way.
I mean, even though obviously at the end of it, somebody would not be completely shocked to learn that you're a libertarian.
Sure,
you could still sit through this and say, yeah, that's a good insight. Or, that's really funny. I never thought of that way. Whatever. That's really well done. So the way you get it, I mean, it's available in the usual outlets, but here's how you should get it. I put up a simple redirect link to make it easy for people to get. So tomwoods.com/libertas. Now I'm not getting a commission or anything, but that just makes it easier than me saying, all right, go to such and such site and then search for whatever to that. Just type in tomwoods.com/libertas. It'll take you immediately to where you can get it. And I'm telling you, I mean, the thing hit #1 on iTunes. Obviously, everybody's getting it. And when everybody does something, you know that my advice on this show is always you should do what they're doing. But definitely you're not going to get this thing and say, man, that was not funny at all. There's no way. In fact, if you say that, I don't think I even want to talk to you. There's no reasoning with you. So anyway, you want to make a final pitch for Libertas before we go?
Well, I just think what I'm doing with Libertas, I think you just kind of summed it up well, but I think it's a similar thing. And that's why I appreciate that, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, what Eric July is doing with Backwards so much. It's like this thing where I'm not the libertarian comedian. I'm just a comedian. I'm a comedian putting out a comedy special, and I'm a libertarian. So that comes through. And in the same way, Eric's a musician, you know what I mean? And he just happens to be an anarchist libertarian musician. And what we're doing, I really do believe, I'd say what Ayn Rand did was pull a lot of people into the idea of thinking in this way with novels. And that is not the culture we live in. The culture we live in, and people are not reading novels like that, but they are consuming podcasts and comedy and music. And I think, look, this is the thing, and this is what the alt-right gets completely wrong, okay? We're not at a point where we can go to war with the federal government right now, okay? We will lose. We'll all get wiped out. We're not putting on our soldier hats and getting out there. What we still need to do is convert tons and tons of people. And what we have going for us now is okay, there's still so many people, Tom, and people like me and you, I think, can lose perspective of this. There's so many people who will still come up to me and go, so you're a libertarian? But how would so-and-so work? And they're just still asking the basic questions that we're, and you know what? There's people like you and the Mises Institute. They have all these answers laid out. It's amazing what you've done. You're up to 1,000 episodes now where there's all this shit laid out. And I think the role of people like me and Eric and other people like that is just to spark people's interest, just to spark their interest in it, and and then they find out, oh yeah, that guy's a libertarian. Oh, okay, who influenced him? And before you know it, they're addicted to the Tom Woods Show and Contra Krugman. So just to people who you guys know, if you want to support us, you're listening, people listening to this show, support Eric July, buy my album and stuff. You'll be, helping us kind of do that and bring more people in, which is always the goal.
Yeah, exactly. So you can get immediately to the page to get it by going to tomwoods.com/libertas, and it's going to just bring a smile to your face, and there are going to be bits that you want to play over and over or call your friends over and say, all right, hey, you got to watch this. But look, if you get in trouble at work, we're not responsible for that. Use it in moderation, but you're going to want to show people, and you're going to really enjoy it. So tomwoods.com/libertas. I will link to that at tomwoods.com/1006. 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's episode 1006. So tomwoods.com/1006 is where you'll find that link also. Well, thanks, Dave. Continued good luck with this.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. Always a pleasure to be on with you.
All right, that's our episode for today. Support Dave Smith, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.